Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Jason Buffington with Veeam Software. Today we are doing a webinar called Pro Tips for Protecting Your Data with New BaaS Capabilities. For the next 45 to 50 minutes or so, I am honored to share this time with Naveen and Michelle from Forrester and IBM, respectively. We're going to start the webinar off by asking Forrester's Senior Analyst for Backup to talk through what's driving some of the changes in technology resiliency in the state of that market. And then Michelle and I will come back on and we'll talk about some of the new capabilities around BaaS that are designed to specifically meet those challenges. With that, Naveen, you're up.
Thank you, Jason. Excited to be here with you. And hello, everyone. Trust you're doing well, and thank you for your time. Do you see the slides moving? No. Okay. So once again, thanks for your time. We have come together to talk about this important topic as Jason just introduced to you. And why is it important? How does it impact each of your firm's business, and what opportunities lie ahead of us? Speaking to the market trend, I'm sure you see this all the time, that the market is a buzzword, the digital transformation. And to enable this digital transformation, IT and business leaders are either bringing in latest and innovative technologies or revamping their existing technology stack. Based on my interest and coverage, I always ask them a question. Are you sure that are you building an always on, always available enterprise or a fragile digital enterprise? Of those questions that I ask following this question as well, I get some interesting data points, and over the next 15-20 minutes, I will be sharing those data points with you. Plus, I have some thought-provoking data points that I will go through. As I talk through these industry examples, trends, market insights, I am sure your inquisitive minds will start asking questions. I would encourage you to submit your questions through the question manager, and we will attempt at answering those. So first of all, I start with I conducted a market study some time back, and the results of which are in front of you. I started off the market study with a leading 30,000 feet question, and that's asking the IT leaders as to how confident do you feel you're able to handle a disaster in your organization. The respondents told us that 18%, that's like 1 in 5, feel very confident about their preparedness. And in my opinion, my humble opinion, we are not in a very good state, not a good state to be in. And hence it's important for us to find out, why is this happening? What's causing it? What can we do about it? What possible remediations do we have? And I find it extremely helpful, before going further, I find it extremely helpful to level set, why do we need to deliver resilient services? Just it looks like there is some problem. The slide's not advancing.
Let me ask you to that back to you again.
I ask you to move it. Can you move one slide, please?
Yeah. Try now, Naveen. I think you've got it back.
Yeah, thanks. So I find it extremely helpful to kind of level set, why do we need to deliver resilient services? I believe organizations of all sizes, industries, and across geos are facing constant pressure from 4 constituents to deliver the services that are always available. The first and foremost are the customers. And I know it's at the cost of making a cliche, but the customers across geographies, across industries are willing to switch providers if they don't get the services in the moment and the time of their need. So that's calling, they exhibit hyper behaviors. They expect businesses to embrace the latest technology and deliver a dependable service every time. For example, NordVPN recently its pulled the plugs out of its long-standing relation with a data center service provider over a security issue. The next player, the next ecosystem player are the partners, and I believe the partners are pushing the envelope equally strongly as the customers do. So much so that from a business standpoint, it is a good practice for the firms to conduct the partners' ability to test on the partners' ability to support their business technology practices and processes. In the events of failures, organizations like Atlanta Hartfield Airport they face sizable claims, like when Delta CEO at Bastion announced that it will seek compensation from the Atlanta airport for its revenue loss arising due to 1.5 days of power outage. The next player in the ecosystem are the regulators, and I believe they are a very important constituent as the regulators are watching every organization like with a hawk's eye, and they can penalize organizations like it happened in the UK. The telecom regulator in the UK penalized the telecom operator for 3 million euros as the calls to emergency services could not be served for 2 hours. The next important constituent are your business peers. Um, they are those who are taking your organization, your products, services to your customers. They expect that you would take the benefit of the latest technologies in the market and help them be productive. They may not be as vocal, but it's a very highly influential group. And as I move forward, I also did a reality check. This Jason, some problem with the slides. I did a reality check, a dipstick test, by asking those who would have faced the outages. I asked them to highlight and identify their top challenges. The top 3 challenges that they shared with us are highlighted in front of you. First and foremost, mismatch of business expectations and the IT capabilities. I think multiple reasons can be attributed to it. Uh, First and foremost, this is a result of the business decisions and IT decisions that organizations would have taken in the past. Firms have not invested enough as much in their backup and DR capabilities. So as sometimes they're asked to prove or to provide investment justification in form of ROI studies, and lack of those numbers result in reduced budgets. Um, Mismatched expectations also happens because the backup and DR capabilities are not upgraded quick and fast enough or simultaneously along with the production setup. But the business expectations do not go down. The other reason is the firms repurpose the infrastructure for their existing production infrastructure for DR purposes. The second factor that the respondents shared with us was insufficient testing and overall preparedness. I think, again, a number of factors contribute to this, which are as follows. While we do backup, we do replication for DR, but the question is, how often do we test? In my experience, almost around 15 to 20% of organizations would test that on a 6-month to a yearly cycle. But those who test, they also test that at a superficial level. It's not as thorough as it should be. And there are multiple reasons again for that, like lack of resources, a high interdependency of applications, not enough tools to perform rapid testing, or little to no adoption of best practices. And the third most important reason here is the lack of staff. For example, I was in a consulting engagement with a multi-billion-dollar insurance firm that employs only 4 people to oversee the whole BCDR program. Jason, would you please advance the slide? So while I did share with you the the low lights of and the challenges organizations face. But thankfully, the information on this slide comes as a respite as I see the technology leaders are taking the right decisions for the technology mix that they use for their application landscape based on the criticality of the applications. As you see on the top left in this chart, mission critical applications and data, the organizations tend to use synchronous replication for that, but for the non-critical applications, they may not be using synchronous replication. So they have the data that's available with them, but they're still not confident, right? So it's clearly coming out that it's the lack of confidence is not arising out of a technology issue. Now, as technology leaders, while this is something good or something to be happy about, but we are hitting another important major trend that's becoming a showstopper for all technology operations, whether we talk of backup, recovery, disaster recovery, preparedness, and so on. And the new, but probably not exactly the new, the spanner in the works is in form of cyber attacks, as that causes the businesses to come to a grinding halt. Now, what you see here in front of you is a result of the study done by World Economic Forum. WEF conducted a study on C-level execs across global 1,000 firms, and they were asked to rate the global risks economies and organizations are facing, and that these risks are rated on the likelihood of occurrence and the potential impact, as you can see on the X and Y axis respectively. And among the list of all the global risks, cyber attacks was cited as the number 4 risk globally. Now, cyber risks today dwarf the once top risks as famine, a major economy or a fiscal crisis, or man-made environmental disaster. I know this is a busy slide with not enough font size, but what's important for you to look at the flashing arrow pointing at the cyber attacks, which is number 4 in terms of the likelihood and the impact, likelihood of occurrence and the impact the organizations would have with those cyber attacks happening. Now, there's an important distinction that I would like to make about these cyber attacks, that the cyber attacks are classified into 2 categories. Jason, would you please advance the slide for me? These cyber attacks are classified into 2 categories. Number 1, the cyber attacks that lead to data loss, data theft, for example, siphoning the secret financial information, whether it is about the customers or about the organizations themselves. We have seen that happening, for example, in case of Marriott or Yahoo, and you've seen the evaluations of these companies deteriorate or the firms face significant liabilities. While we saw the prominence of such cyber thefts, the other category of cyber attacks is the ransomware attack, where the technology systems are kept hostage. And after the business operations, as the business operations come to a standstill, this is an organized business. This is an industry by itself, and is growing by leaps and bounds. If I were to look back like 4 years, the total number of ransomware attacks faced by firms globally could have been easily counted, but not anymore. The ransomware attacks continue to push the boundary in terms of its count, the business impact on organizations that suffer from it, and the after effects of these ransomware attacks as it could be devastating for any organization. Let me share a couple of examples with you. Number 1, a global aluminum manufacturer suffered from an attack in March 2019. It took the company more than 4.5 months to bring back its first lot of systems online, back into business operations. Now, you can imagine that with the 4.5-month outage that this organization had, this company was unable to publish its quarterly business results. Another example is city of Baltimore, and multiple cities that have probably paid through the nose, or many other organizations who have eventually close their business because they can't sustain the financial losses or the liabilities. And then there are several organizations that get attacked more than once for the same vulnerability. Jason, please advance the slide. Now, interestingly, when I asked the respondents on whether um, whether they are whether they have faced ransomware, they faced outage because of a ransomware or not, 21% of the respondents said that yes, they have faced ransomware is becoming a reason of the business outage. Now, I realize that this is a little older data, 2 years back, and I made a statement that counting the ransomware attacks today is kind of impossible. So I don't have official data, but I can certainly cite you with my experience as I engage with organizations who have been attacked. The percentage of organizations, if I were to interview organizations today, the percentage of organizations that face an outage because of cyber attack, that number has grown significantly. Now, what that means is that the next question that comes to me, and I ask the respondents, is are these the organizations, those who face outages because of ransomware attacks, how confident are they in recovering if they were to face that one more time? And I believe when I look at the responses, when I looked at these responses, my only words were delusion rules. And I call it delusion because it is so. You can see through it. When you try to corroborate the confidence levels that these respondents share with us with their organizational plans, their backup and recovery procedure, their practices, and so on, you would then wonder, why is this percentage so high? And I believe it's because the firms still consider that having the right security infrastructure will secure them and will provide them enough arms and ammunition so that they can recover. But they don't realize that the attackers are getting in front of them through known or unknown vulnerabilities, and the kind of questions that these organizations must be looking at and testing out whether they should be confident or not are on the lines of how often the firms practice for recovery in or during ransomware attacks. Now, how do the firms organize themselves internally? And I'll share with you on these points as we go further. The next question is, how do different teams communicate to strengthen themselves to handle those ransomware situations? Is there a common or shared understanding of recovery methodology during those ransomware situations? Jason, one more slide, please. Now, since we are talking about backup as a service, DR, and business continuity, let me take you through the nitty-gritties of a recovery from a ransomware attack and why it becomes so tough. I give you one example of this global aluminum manufacturer, and there are umpteen number of examples publicly available. Now, as you can see through through the color-coded graphic with notation and comments, the challenges that IT leaders face during recovery are, first and foremost, how to determine what point in time is a clean copy. Now, as you see, the green section, which is recovery points with clean copies, but the yellow section, the orange one, which is possible but risky recovery points. Now, why is it important to look at what is the clean copy? Because ransomwares have a tendency to lie dormant in any setup for weeks and months together. An example for you, Bayer Pharmaceutical in Germany publicly rolled out a statement in April 2019 that they had a ransomware or a malware living in their environment for a year plus. Now that means if you had the backup of all those infected systems, if you were to map that onto this picture, the backups or the recovery points for the last 1 year are also infected. That means they're not safe to recover from. The next question that comes to mind is, okay, now how do I then find out where do I recover from? That means IT leaders must be working with their security teams, must be partnering with the security teams to perform the forensics and find out when did the ransomware get in, and when is the backup or recovery point just before that from which you can recover. Now, let's say the backup and the security teams collectively are able to find those backup instances, but the bigger question then is, would the security teams let you recover from those copies? And the answer is likely no. Now, let's assume that collectively you have identified which backup is clean, uninfected, and safe to recover from. It is for sure, given the example that I shared with you, it is sure that the backups are old. Now, even a bigger question is, then would the business team ever let you recover from those older copies? As that would mean the business transactions, the assets that have been developed in the last 3 months, 6 months, whatever that period is, or the IP that has been developed, that gets lost. So it immediately becomes not just a technology decision, a decision that has to be collectively taken by not just the IT leaders themselves, but the security leaders as well as the business teams. Now, with this, I hope I was able to share with you the kind of the state of the market from a backup and recovery perspective. In my view, the situation demands awareness. And I believe only when you're aware, you're in a position to equip and prepare yourself to handle it. Jason, that kind of brings me to end of my part. And before I hand it over to you, I just want to take 30 seconds to recall what I just discussed. I pointed out on the fact that the execs are not very confident about the resiliency of their services as they plan to transform their businesses digitally. I talked about the global risk that organizations are facing and where does cyber attack lie compared to others. I also talked about the organization's ability to handle those risks. And I also gave you a quick overview or an anatomy of recovery post the ransomware attacks. As a reminder, I'm sure certain questions would have come in your mind. Please do submit those via the question manager and we'll look to answer those. Thank you so much. Jason, over to you.
Naveen, thank you for that. Every time that I hear you speak, I learn something along the way. One of the things that I particularly liked about the data that you shared today, you talked about within the charts, you showed how there was a skills gap was part of the challenge as far as from a staffing perspective when it relates to business continuity. And I would, by extension, presume that also includes traditional data protection. One of the things I think is interesting about this particular slide as we're leaving it, and I'll transition into the Veeam and IBM section in just a second, is for the last couple of years, backup vendors like Veeam have said, hey, we can help you with your ransomware attacks, or ransomware recoveries, I should say. And I used to poke fun at them because for a backup vendor to say we can recover from ransomware, I used to say was kind of like saying you can recover from an earthquake, you can recover from theft or flood, meaning can you restore data? Right? But the difference, though, I think in this case is that, and Michelle, I'd love to hear your perspective on this as we switch over, is for all of those scenarios, your primary goal is always, that near current version. It's how quickly can you get the last known good up? And I think what Naveen has pointed out today is that there is a different set of skills and also technology requirements in order to be able to recover a pristine copy of that data for the business to start resuming from. And in many cases, that may not be the most current, but since most backup admins don't think that way, arguably skills gap as it relates to recovering from a ransomware attack is much like the skills gap for BCDR. It is more than just operational recovery of IT systems to their last known good state. I'll ask either of you to weigh in on that, and then we'll switch to the next part of the presentation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, here in IBM Business Resiliency Services, we've built a business over the last few decades of bringing customers up from an outage as quickly as possible. That's always been the intention. But what we're seeing with cyber is that is a unique outage, and there's a unique requirement there an additional step of data verification, data validation that must be done before you initiate that restore. Because if you don't, you can very quickly exacerbate the problem and extend the corruption through the environment. So with that additional requirement, that drives additional requirements into the underlying technology that's required to bring up a customer in the event of a cyber outage. And we'll talk more about that in this call, Jason.
Yeah, otherwise an operational recovery could likely land you not only back in the orange area that we see here, but in the orange with a false sense of hope, thinking that you've actually solved the problem, and in fact, you're actually re-waiting to have the problem reintroduced. I think Naveen mentioned that many organizations get hit more than once because they're reintroducing that. And that's going to bring us into more of a skills conversation, not even just withstanding cybersecurity. There is a difference when we talk about backup as a service, DR as a service. There is a difference in skills that that folks need to acknowledge as part of those success criteria moving into 2020. So if you're a backup admin, and that includes whether you're using on-premise backup technologies or backup as a service that's still being managed in part by you, your primary skill set is typically around operational or infrastructure level recovery, right? So for best of breed, you're looking to combine backups and snapshots and replicas, and so that means that you likely have competency and expertise in formal training and backup and replication software. You know how to invoke or integrate with hardware-based replication, hardware-based snapshots, etc. That's kind of the must-know category if you're a backup admin. The should-know is that, okay, now that you know how to back up, you probably need to have an understanding of what are the applications you're going to be recovering that data into, how do the hypervisors work, how the operating systems work. But again, it's all around so that you can recover that data back into those production platforms. But that's still very much an infrastructure-centric view, right? I would argue, and this actually comes from I did my BCDR training actually at an IBM BCRS facility many moons ago. But when you really start talking about how do I get the business processes going, the must-knows and the coulds and the shoulds start to look really different. The must-knows come a lot more from, can you articulate and quantify the business impact of downtime? Can you quantify the IT dependencies towards the business or vice versa? Do you understand the regulations and compliance mandates related to an assurance of availability of systems? Can you do orchestration and workflow? Michelle, this is the world you live in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly where we have pivoted our business in recent years. Here in Global Technology Services, where Business Resiliency Services resides, and what we do for clients from a data protection and recovery standpoint, we've augmented that suite of expertise by recently acquiring a company about 3 years ago. It's a software company called Synovi, and we now have a product in market called IBM Resiliency Orchestration that will orchestrate the recovery all the way up through the application layer for a client. And in addition to that, it provides an assessment of the overall risk in the environment as well on a day-to-day basis. So you can very cleanly get a view of your environment and understand very specifically what you need to pay attention to. Given what we've been seeing in the market and the increase in ransomware attacks and as Naveen covered, the increase not only in frequency but in the cost of those specific outages, it behooves us as the steward for our clients in terms of their protection and their recovery to help them in the event of a cyber attack in both prevention, protection, and of course recovery in the event of an unintended outage. We invested in the orchestration product and baked into the product cyber incident recovery features for both platform and data to help with that last mile recovery, so to speak, data verification, data validation, to ensure that we are not, as we spoke earlier, exacerbating the problem, and that we are restoring from a clean and air-gapped copy that we're assuring is good. So that's something that we and others in the business have started to look at. But IBM is combining that technology with expertise and all of the processes in place to start to address the risk and compliance requirements that our clients are seeing across industries.
Yeah. So we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about the services themselves. But if we kind of pare that back a little bit, one of the things that I think has become really present for me is a lot of times we used to see that the backup admin would be, thought they were the cornerstone of most recovery efforts, whether it was traditional BCDR for fire and earth and hurricane and those kind of things, or now in the cyber thing. And what I think we're seeing now is less and less is the backup admin, or even necessarily the backup admin skill set, core to that recovery experience. In fact, so this is some data that Veeam acquired a while back, looking at who's actually responsible for driving backup versus DR. And what you'll see here is that the backup admin, that little line near the bottom, the backup admin is actually even part of the recovery effort only about 29% of the time. In fact, they're only in charge of it about 7% of the time. The vast majority of the times, what you're really thinking about is more around IT operations, IT infrastructure, and again, as we talked about, really combining that with folks that have much more of a business continuity, disaster recovery, and now certainly a cybersecurity set of competencies to be able to guide them on that, because all of these are operational at best. How do you then orchestrate, automate, and provide workflow for those operational tasks? To do that, let's talk more about the IBM offer. Michelle, you want to take us through this?
Yeah, I can certainly do that. In that last chart, if you look at that from a runbook perspective, right? Think about that. So these are officers, these are roles, these are individuals, these are functions, but think of them also as the runbooks to bring up some of these key functions in your enterprise. Imagine digitizing those so they're no longer a paper copy. I'm going to give an example of a very large enterprise that was hit with Petya, and IBM helped them in that outage. They were very prepared from a DR plan perspective, very prepared. However, Petya actually affected the badge-in process. So none of their employees could actually badge into their facilities. So guess where their run books were inside the facility?
Wow.
Guess where their experts were outside the facilities. So that was a bit of a problem, right? So imagine being able to digitize your run books. So that again is that strength of orchestration and being able to automate that recovery. Even if you want to do that remotely, you can. So let's go to the next chart, if you will.
Before you go there, though, I gotta plug into that. We talk about how the personnel become much of the problem. Probably one of the most prolific lessons I ever learned from my time in BCRS is, so I took it down in Texas, and so New Orleans had been hit with hurricanes, Houston gets hit by floods, and one of the things that folks continually pointed out to me was this concept of, the person who wrote the run book and the plan and who's going to hit the button, if the building is underwater, chances are so is their living room.
Right.
And if my living room is underwater, I didn't come into work that day. And so if you were waiting on me to hit a button or run a script or anything else, you're going to be waiting a while because I'm going to be bailing out the water in my living room.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's more often than not what happens. So, that ability to have a managed service provider, and here's, really where IBM comes into play. And there's an important word on this chart in addition to resiliency, and this is new as of 2019. You see two brands have really come together here for IBM Security and IBM Business Resiliency Services. We are aligned in market and are bringing to bear the full portfolio across both of our organizations to serve our clients. And what we found across security and resiliency is we do the same things for clients. We do the same things all the way up the stack. We provide the expertise, the boots on the ground, as well as the remote support. from an expertise perspective, from a technology perspective. We lead our industries and our markets. The only difference are the verbs we use. They say secure and protect, we say protect and recover. And so it really is a nice marriage, and it's like I said, a breadth of capabilities that's quite. So everything from the advisory services and really security and resiliency needs to be a forethought in the design of the enterprise, especially in the event of cyber and ransomware attacks and the future and the complexity that is growing. I think we're already seeing that in terms of recent survey results of our C-suite, that they're starting to look at security and resiliency differently from the infrastructure in terms of the amount of forethought and investment and design that's going to be required going forward to ensure more of a resilient infrastructure, if you will, an enterprise. We talk about the minimum viable company that you need versus restoring just the platform in terms of an outage. It's really about the restoration of the business process that went out. And of course, we're also in the protection and security business of ensuring that the outage never happens, right? So that's really where we play, and it's all the way from the advisory side of the house to, in the event of the outage, phone a friend. One of the things that I've been thinking about throughout this presentation is I had the opportunity to visit the IBM Cyber Range in Cambridge, Massachusetts over the summer, and they bring clients in. It was a client simulation. They will simulate a cyber attack for the client, and they'll bring in, back to the roles that you had on the one chart, Jason, they'll have every person there in terms of that role, and they will understand the client's environment enough to start taking out aspects of the business. And then they basically role play and watch how each of the roles responds. And it's fascinating. But one of the things that, and you get to watch sort of passively, but one of the things that you quickly think of is you want to pick the phone up and call someone. Call someone with the expertise, because if you don't know what's happening, and often you don't, especially in the event of a cyber attack and the way it presents itself, it's unique. Something like we're seeing network traffic and we don't know what this is, but it's large, and within 45 minutes everything blue screens. That type of thing, you want to pick up the phone and phone someone and get the expertise. And I think that's really where IBM comes to bear in terms of helping our clients. So this is everything we provide in terms of backup and data protection, now cyber resilience, and then of course disaster recovery and that business continuity as the focus, more so than just the platform recovery that you'll see, the typical cloud vendors provide.
That totally makes sense for me, and I love the advisory part, right? I am certainly passionate on the phone a friend aspect. I'm surprised by the number of even large enterprises that they don't have that level of expertise, and even if they do, often that expertise is rather stale, right? Because they just don't have that many disasters and they don't see that many environments. So I love the idea of that being expertise led, and certainly we're happy to be powered by. Can we walk through the hybrid cloud approach?
Yeah, just that with hybrid cloud, what this really means is the complexity is increasing, right? And where things were difficult before, they're more difficult from a hybrid cloud perspective. One of the unique value propositions that IBM has is, much like our clients, we've been in IT for a long time. Much like our clients, we've got legacy assets that we need to monetize on-prem and protect. I definitely believe hybrid is the reality. We've seen 20% of workloads digitized to cloud. I expect that percentage to increase, but never to 100%, right? We're always going to have something on-prem, and it's going to truly be hybrid, and it's about protecting and recovering across the hybrid estate, whether it's on-prem, colo, cloud, and multi-cloud is also a reality, right? So it's really that important, and we're seeing the entrance of even more cloud providers that are starting to become more prevalent than the top three. So this is just increasing the complexity, it's increasing the variance, it's increasing the entry points for things like ransomware and outages. And I think given that complexity, for us at IBM, complexity serves us. For Veeam, I think this virtual world where Veeam has grown up, it has certainly been a partnership that we've benefited from, given the expertise that Veeam has in that space. So the two have been a pretty nice match, especially on the IBM Cloud and Veeam side.
Totally agree on that. I'm just doing a time check. We got about 12 minutes left. You want to take us through cyber, and then we're talking about how does that combine with cloud and then the service itself?
Yeah, sure. So for cyber resiliency, what we say is to do it right, you really need a programmatic approach. You'll hear the NIST framework referred to a lot. That is one programmatic framework. There are others as well, but that's really what it takes. And if you look at the schematic here with insight, prevention, detection, response, and recovery, you know, that full continuum is really what you need to look at. With what we've talked about today from a resiliency perspective, we consider ourselves right of the boom. It's unfortunate, it's happened, but we're going to help you recover, and we're going to help you recover in the right way. Back to the beginning of the presentation, it's not about getting up and running as quickly as possible. It's about ensuring that you're not propagating any sort of risk in the environment, and that you can assure yourself and also regulators. In a lot of the cases now, we're seeing an increase in compliance and regulatory pressure in your DR plan to present to them that you have a DR plan that can withstand a cyber attack. So that is an additional requirement, that especially in the banking industry in Europe, as an example, we're seeing that additional requirement. We're seeing it here in the US, the likes of Sheltered Harbor helping with that. So you're going to see that increase across multiple markets and industries as well. The prevalence of this is going to grow. It just, for everyone on the call, it should make sense that this is going to be something that only increases in relevance as we go forward. So doing it right and doing it in a programmatic way is the right thing to do. Go ahead.
So let's talk through that for a second. So for many organizations, when we talk about, okay, so what does doing it right mean? Certainly, so I wrote a book back in 2010, and the first words on chapter 1, the last words on the last chapter were, get your data out of the building. Right? Because at least if you got your data out of the building and it was clean, you could eventually roll up your sleeves and maybe get back to doing business again. And I think for a lot of organizations, whether they no longer want to run a warm site or a cold site of their own, especially when we talk about, say, commercial and upper commercial and lower enterprise, they may not have a secondary site. I think this is where one of the reasons why we start to see one of the early drivers or catalysts for as much cloud-based infrastructure as we've typically seen. And Naveen, you're welcome to also weigh in on this. So this is actually some data that I pulled from someplace else where we looked at, you know, year over year, what were people using the cloud for, you know, the cloud. Now, I put that in quotes because there's, you know, more than one cloud. But one thing I thought was interesting is if you look back over the last several years, it used to be that the number one use case for cloud was as a repository for backups and archives, right? Just get your data out of the building. And then followed quickly behind that was, I'd like a second site because I don't have one, right? And then what you saw, and this is the stacking of the green, red, blue on the left side of the chart on the right-hand piece, we saw production applications. Well, something interesting happened around that 2017 timeframe where people said, you know, I'm ready to go production. In hybrid, and Michelle, you mentioned as well that, you know, we think hybrid is that end state, right? It's not a mid state till we all turn off the data center and we're going to all be cloudy. No, we're living in a multi-hybrid architecture. But there was something that happened in 2017 where folks said, yes, I'm going to run production there. If you look at this data though, at those organizations that said either they're going to use cloud as a repository for backup or they're going to do disaster recovery in a cloud, you still see, even year over year, it's a pretty consistent bar between 61 and 57% over a 5-year run, where folks said the cloud is part of my data protection strategy, right? I'm going to get my data out of the building and hopefully do something else with it. So a couple of years ago, when this first came out, I started asking organizations, who do you want to, whose cloud do you want to use for data protection, for backup and disaster recovery? And I was surprised. So I'd asked several hundred customers, but the anecdotes were surprisingly similar. The first part they said was, well, what do you think about using, Joe's reseller down the street, right? Joe comes in and Joe installs all my new servers and Joe handles all my licensing. And if something breaks, Joe comes and fixes it. I'm using Joe as a proverbial. I know most enterprises or resellers are bigger than that, but the response was, no, I don't really want Joe's reseller to be my DR or my BaaS offering. One, because I'm not sure I trust that they're going to stand up that copy of last resort. I mean, is it going to be colo? If I'm underwater, are they underwater? If I'm on fire, are they on fire because of that proximity? I love the fact that Joe has empathy and engagement with me. They know my environment, they know my business, but I'm not sure I trust them to have that copy of data when I last need it. Well, the opposite side of that survey was, what about hyperscale clouds, right? So, and we can all think of a generic hyperscale cloud vendor here and there. And of course, they probably are going to have your data, right? That's the good news. The bad news is, to most of them, I'm a subscriber number, right? They don't know my business. They've never met me. They've just met my credit card before I started sending data up there. And what we found in that research was, it wasn't until you actually combined 3 different areas. There's the empathy and engagement of, do you know my environment? Coupled with, am I confident, on the right-hand side, that that last copy of resort will still be there? But it's not really interesting until you combine that with specialized skills in backup and BCDR. And based on what Naveen shared and Michelle echoed, you could probably argue that's backup, BCDR, and cyber preparedness. Until you combine those specialized skills, you have empathy and competence, but no ability to actually act on that. Candidly, what Veeam does is we just provide the software, right? That's our piece of it. Is we provide reliable, flexible software. It runs on-prem for physical and virtual and cloud. That's our piece. But everything else comes from the services that are delivered that wrap these 3 areas of competency around it. That's one of the reasons why I was so excited to share a webinar with IBM today. Michelle, any response to this before we talk about how that solution is manifests from Big Blue?
Yeah, I think though one of the benefits with working with Veeam software though is you've helped our delivery organization, do their job easier, right? Because of the simplicity, the powerfulness of the software, the power of the software, but also its ease of use and, the ability to control a lot from very little, right? So that has actually helped our delivery organization, right? So that is something to note. But I think this Venn diagram really sums it up. And in terms of what we offer here in resiliency, I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, where we are headquartered, and we'll tell you that the likes of Hurricane Dorian, our delivery organization, I think we had 12 declares. They'll sleep here when they're looking after clients during a natural disaster. So that Venn diagram really talks to the heart and soul of what those folks do. And any technology and efficiencies and automation that we can provide them is really important. The other thing that we talk about a lot, Naveen and Jason and I, is the convergence that we're seeing in market across enterprise backup and recovery, right? The convergence of backup and recovery to become really a single market, and those vendors that can span both DR and backup, and I believe also cyber, are really going to be positioned in the future to help our clients in the best way. So again, that's another another attribute of Veeam that is very appealing to us as the largest systems integrator in the world. So thank you very much today, Jason. I think we've covered a lot. I don't know if you want to go through the solution benefits here in detail, and why we work, but I really appreciate the time to meet with everyone today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just want to finish with, I'll leave this screen up for just a minute for those folks that want to take some screenshots of it. So, certainly IBM is, the recognized leader in disaster recovery as a service by just about everybody that matters. As I said, I've been in this business for 30 years, very, very early on. I learned disaster recovery from IBM many, many moons ago. Meanwhile, on the Veeam side, we make software that just works, and we're the leader, or a market leader in the data protection side. You'll see there's a pair of URLs underneath that that go back to the resiliency services offerings that Michelle leads, as well as there's a page on the lower right hand side. You can see the breadth of combined solutions available that are IBM expertise led, Veeam powered as well. With that, and I want to be respectful of time, we only got about 3 minutes left. I do also want to make a plug while I look at the Q&A. If any of this is interesting to you and you want to get more information around this, so most vendors of any size try to do some kind of conference now and then. We've gone beyond that. We have our in-person conference called Veeam On every May. 6 months offset of that, we have something called Veeam On Virtual. Just ended up about 2 weeks ago. You are welcome to watch over 20 different speakers, over 1,000 minutes of 24 hours of streaming content on deep dives, updates, and all the newest features that are there. And in fact, almost the entire portfolio is available to be expertise led and fulfilled through our friends in Raleigh and everywhere else that IBM operates. So encourage you to register for that as well. I'm looking through the Q&A, and we actually didn't have any questions. So I guess that just means that we answered everything along the way. So with that, Naveen and Michelle, I want to thank you both for joining us today. I hope everyone at home got something out of this. So on behalf of Forrester, IBM, and Veeam, thank you for your time. And by the way, make sure to get your data out of the building. It's important. Bye-bye.
Thank you.